think in chat so much. Okay, so any wins for this week? Anything that you would like to share? Something that you've done? You found knowledge, you found wisdom, anything? What's going on? Crickets, sweet. Okay, awesome. Okay, Anthony.
I got my first feedback from the coaches back on a Rise course that I
Oh,
submitted.
finally.
And how was it?
Oh, it was good. I went through and kind of line by line evaluated and implemented the feedback and redid the course and moving on. Now I'm working on
A
storyline.
lot of iterations.
Yeah, learning a lot as I go. But it's applying like old skills to a new context, because this is really very much the same as teaching. It's just a new context and a new medium.
True, true. Oh yeah, we're going to be talking about that tonight. We're going to be talking about objectives. We're going to be talking about actions. And we're going to be talking about action mapping. So yeah, you will find some similarities with teaching. That's definite, but there will be also differences. And again, we're gonna do a simulation on the whole SME. What should I do? What should I go through for that extra session? So we'll get there. Did my first Beyond video and inserted it into my Rise course. Awesome, Judy. And do put the entire thing on your portfolio and also put it separately. I mean, you could do it in your video creations and you can put it in your Rise. So you're capitalizing on both frontiers. So that could be good. Yay for Judy. Okay, Jody, not Judy. Judy's something else. Jody, thank you. Anywho, I'm gonna pin my screen.
Jody.
Jody. I'm terrible with names. Sorry.
It's okay.
But good intentions, though. Good intentions. Okay, so I usually like to start the action mapping thing with, call it an opener. Anyone knows what is the answer to the greatest question? The ultimate answer to the greatest question?
42.
Thank you so much. I knew it. I knew you would say that. Guy that does games, D&D would know. Okay, anyone knows what we're talking about here? 42. Okay, I'm waiting for the chat.
It's
The answer to
Hitchhiker
life.
Guide.
It's the answer to life, the
Fathom.
universe, and everything.
Yes, yes. Possibly one of the best movies ever created. And
Books.
no,
It's a book.
it's
Book. Yeah,
I know.
I'm with Anthony. Book.
Read the book, love the movie, no problem. Both of them, I'm in love with.
Yeah.
Okay, book is right there as well, like right there in my showcase of sophistication. Yeah, I have the book there. So yeah, that's why I usually like to say, don't panic, because when it comes to action mapping and learning objectives, it's a lot of panic. What should I do? What should I put? What should I consider? How can I do it? And yeah, I don't want you to panic. We're gonna take it easy. We're gonna take it step by step. And to be completely honest, with time, it becomes a muscle. You kind of know how to put your learning objectives together, and you kind of know how you could do things. So to start off, let's get into the basics. The basics. You talk to a client, you go into a meeting, you get a request, and usually there's a specific business goal that needs to be addressed. So when I'm saying a business goal is what the company eventually wants. And this is not related to the learning objectives. According to ATD, we have two types of objectives. We have the enabling objective, and we have the terminal objective, or the terminal outcome, to be even like more accurate about it. So the terminal objective, or the final outcome, is how I want to see my employees, my people, my learners being able to perform in a certain way. This is not something that we can promise with, but we need to understand what people are doing and how we can kind of close the gap between where they want to see the people and where they are right now. Okay, so don't confuse yourself with business goals as the same as learning objectives or learning goals. They are completely different. Those are the terminal objectives. So how does it work? We get business goals, and from the business goals, we get performance gaps. This is where we understand, okay, obviously people need to work on something. Obviously, people need to engage in specific actions to get to that business goal. And from the from the performance gaps, we get to know, okay, so you want them to be able to perform that specific skill or have that specific set of knowledge, or you want them to behave in a certain way, or you want a collection of all of them. Maybe you want to increase accuracy. Maybe you want them to follow a specific framework or a technique or a process of some sort. Fair enough, because that would aid the performance, and that can, in a way or another, possibly through training or training and a combination of different things, can get to the business goal. From which we start to understand how we can put up our learning objectives, because we know now what are the knowledge needed, the knowledge context that is needed, the skills and the behaviors. So now we know what people need to act upon, what needs to be worked upon, what the learner needs to do during the learning experience. And when I'm saying a learning experience, again, I mean synchronous, asynchronous, hybrid, come what may. Based on those learning objectives, instructions and assessments come to play. Because when we put a learning objectives are basically actionable verbs that I want to see the learner doing during the learning experience. Accordingly, I need to put a series of instructions, set of assessments that can let the learner be contained in a frame where they will be able to carry out those actionable verbs, and from which we get to understand what we will work on. Now, when we're talking about learning objectives and actions and how we can put them into play, we need to address first the mistakes, the common mistakes that happen with any learning designer. A newbie, a veteran, an oldie, a goldie, come what may, we all fall into those mistakes. Sometimes, unintentionally, sometimes out of ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance in a bad way. You just don't know. So mistake number one, and this is according to the book Map It by Kathy Moore, who taught us about action mapping. So mistake number one, learners do not need to know everything. Okay? Do not treat your learning experience as a knowledge dump. Because what happens, more or less, you do your research, you go into topic analysis, and whatever you find out, and whatever you allocate in any way possible, you just copy paste it. You copy paste it. And you include the references, all of the rigorous references. You put up all the details. And you know what? Sarah doesn't need to know everything to carry out marketing. Sometimes to do marketing, Sarah, you need to know how to carry out a specific action. And you need minimum necessary knowledge to carry out that action. But I don't need to know everything. And for people that have attended my mentorship sessions before, they know about that one time that I've wasted a big portion of my life attending a specific learning program. And it still scars me till this day, although it's been over like 6 years or 7 years, it still scars me that I was attending something called the CIPD, the Charter Institute for Personnel Development. And it's sort of a prestigious program in the UK on human resources and learning and development. So I was going through my diploma in human resources. And Michael, I shit you not, the first hour and a half, I just spent it listening to a Welsh guy talking about the history of human resources. And the history of human resources started with the Quakers in the 1800s. Who cares? Who cares? How is that going to help me carry out a job in HR administration or in performance management? No one cared. and an hour and a half was wasted. Like how I've seen e-learnings before that explain the history of psychology, how marketing started, how I need to let you know everything about the topic and all of the resources associated to it. Not entirely correct, because learners only need what is needed for the performance gap, what is needed for them to carry out a specific action. They don't need to know everything. Okay, so learners do not need to know everything. Mistake number two, which is also something that we fall into. Mistake number two, knowledge doesn't equal information. There's a huge difference between both of them. Information is 50% accuracy of data. You could have like maybe saw it on businessballs.com, on mindtools.com. It could be something that have been recently debunked. It doesn't have practical implementation. It could be a theory of some sort, but later on with much research, it's actually not it can't be replicated. It's not replicable. It's not possible to utilize it often with different people from different cultures or in different situations. And that's kind of an issue that is happening in the scientific field now. And I was listening to a podcast about this, that many people are getting into the field of behavioral economics, and they do a lot of experiments to prove their worthiness. But the huge issue is that that experiment, that test, that thing cannot be replicated. When it comes to knowledge, we want something that is practical, applicable, something that is sequential to the learner, something that has reasoning, and something that the learner, once they acquire it in whatever the learning experience that you're going to put them through, they can get off-boarded and use it. One of the biggest problems in the learning industry is that people go through learning experiences asynchronous, like e-learning or a job aid or an infographic or a video of some sort. And once they're done with it, they don't really know how they can take this and use it in their day-to-day activities, or take this and be able to apply it in their industry or in their workflow. So you need to first look into things that are more referenced, further updated, not obsolete data, things that I can work with. And it has to work in tandem with the contextual analysis that we've talked about before. I need to put the learner persona in mind, not something that it sounds good, it looks good, but when you put it for that specific learner in that specific context, it might not work. Plus, it's obsolete. Like how I've ranted more than once about emotional intelligence. Because emotional intelligence, yeah, it has knowledge, but it's not application-based. And you cannot come out of an e-learning about emotional intelligence emotionally intelligent by all means possible. Okay, same thing goes with legacy assessments, like your DISC analysis and your MBTIs and your RISIC and your Holland and all of those legacy assessments. I mean, okay, I went through the assessment. I'm not going to go into like the validity of the assessment itself. Let's put this for another conversation. But okay, you went through the assessment. What can I do knowing that this is my preference? This is what I'm more inclined towards. How am I going to use this in dealing with my manager, in coaching my employee, in getting the best results, in doing a specific framework? How will this help? Because I had a client before that told me, build a program based on the results of an assessment. I was like, how can I do this? And how would that help sales representatives in doing their job by basing an entire learning program on the results of an assessment? That's completely ridiculous. Okay, so mistake number two, knowledge doesn't equal information. Mistake number three, quizzes do not equal application. I mean, I have many teachers here that are transitioning, and you pretty much know that if you expose a person, you put a person, come what may, that person is an adult or that person is a child, a toddler, a teenager, and they go through a specific quiz, that doesn't mean they can apply it. Mostly, when you do a quiz that is based off maybe a situation that they need to remember a word about, so you're basing this on memory, rather than trying to intrigue their cognition. Like I usually tell my students, when you're putting up a quiz, please use problem-based questions. Please rephrase, paraphrase, put it into different wordings. Let the learner start to imagine the situation. Try to consider, how am I going to use the data that I was just exposed to in the learning experience and manipulate it to solve that problem-based question. The problem-based question doesn't have to be like a paragraph. It can be a 2-3 liner, and it speaks about an incident, a possible work incident, a specific action that happens in the workplace, something that is pretty much pressing that the employee will go through, and they need to utilize that process or steps that you just exposed them to in the learning experience. So quizzes, testing someone's memory, doesn't equal application. That doesn't mean that they can apply. That means that they can recognize, maybe they can explain, maybe they can identify. And as you can see, I'm using actionable verbs. Those actionable verbs do not mean application. They are more targeting cognition rather than application-based cognition. They're rather targeting that the person can explain something, but that doesn't mean that the person can use it in a psychomotor type of fashion. Okay. So the goal here is that the goal of action mapping is to solve business problems by changing job behavior. What we're looking into by addressing those mistakes is that we don't want people to know everything, because everything will not guarantee that people's job behavior will change. We don't want people to get information because information is unreliable. We want something that is practical. We don't want people to be solving quizzes that are only going to be targeting if they understand something or not. We would rather look into higher cognitive load, higher means of a challenge to the learner, so they literally can change their behavior. And yet again, we do not change people's behavior. We do not have that power. Like, by all means, we can't cast spells on learners to change their behaviors. What do? We create an environment. We create and facilitate an environment for learners to take the decision of change. If we prompt them the right way, if we use the right aesthetics, if we can guide them, give them a progression system of continuous feedback, if we can incentivize them to increase their mastery level, to increase their desire to know more and understand further and apply further in the learning experience, we can actually help them take that decision of change. But we cannot change people. Teachers, maybe you can see the change when you're dealing with your students for an entire term or a semester or come what may. But as learning designers, we put up a plan, and as developers, we put a plan and we throw it to the ocean, hoping that it could work. When we're throwing that plan to the ocean, it better be a good environment for the learner to thrive in, to survive, to actually manage to achieve those learning objectives or those specific actions that we have intended for them to go through. That's why it's also called intended learning objectives. So our goal is not to prepare people for a knowledge test, but rather to prepare them to perform. Okay? Turning vague, they should know this, training requests that come from clients, or when an SME starts to rant about so many things that the learner should know, the learner should know, the learner should know. This is when I intervene. I'm like, no, the learner shouldn't know all of that. What does the learner need to do? Not what does the learner need to know. Huge difference between both of them. Okay, because I want them to solve real, clearly defined performance issues. Okay, so solutions that target a specific audience in specific situations and are provided when most needed. That's why I hate when we build something that is extremely generic and speaks about whatever the generic situation that can be created, unlike that we created in an acute format, in a very convergent format towards something specific that I want them to come out of doing. Sorry. Okay, so when we're dealing with our SMEs, we're going through that meeting. There are certain things that we need to consider. The solution might not include conventional training at all. It might include a job aid. It might include a video. It might include an infographic. It might include, Kelly. It might include microlearning, for instance. It might include so many different things. The word action refers to focusing on what people need to do, not what people need to know. So we write the goal for that project. Do you say SME for SME? No, I just say SME. I don't do the usual SME thing for many people that I respect say that word, but I don't say it. SME, meh would work. Yeah, SMEs are MOOCs at the end of the day, so it's a thing. Yeah, that's gonna live with me for a long time. So write the goal for your project when you're talking with your client, when you're talking with your SME. Sometimes you meet the client and the SME. Sometimes you meet the client and then the SME. Sometimes you meet all of them in the beginning, or sometimes you meet them in like separate meetings. But anyways, number one, commit to a business performance goal with an aim to solve the problem with. Second, you lead, and the client and the SME participate. The client has a request, good for you. The SME has data, good for you. I know learning design. I know theory of learning. I know how to put instructions and I know how to stitch it. So I will be advocating and helping you get to that business goal and to weave that good tapestry of knowledge that you have into something that is functional. Okay. Also, in certain situations, sometimes we can actually piggyback on some learners. Maybe you'll be taking like a sample of learners to ask, or maybe some people went through a similar training or a similar e-learning or similar experience. So it's good to know their feedback as well, if possible. Sometimes you can't, especially if it's something novel and it was never created before. So number one, prepare to ask why. Anyone knows about the 5 whys? Why, and why? It's a thing. You go into the depth of like there's something when I used to teach managers about like decision making, and we always talk about like the 5 whys. And the 5 whys is that why is this? And one of the famous stories in that is that my car doesn't like vanilla ice cream. Anyone knows about that one? Anyone knows about that story? It's an actual story. It's a real story. I'm not making this up. Someone's car doesn't like vanilla ice cream. You can type down General Motors vanilla ice cream and the entire story will just show there. So Michael comes to General Motors with a huge problem that his car hates vanilla ice cream. But Kara here, well, she ignored his request because basically it's bonkers. I mean, obviously this is ridiculous. But again, he sends another request. My car dislikes and hates vanilla ice cream. It's causing me issues. So Kara's supervisor, who's an engineer, comes to the rescue and takes an attention into this and summons Michael to talk with him. So Michael explains, look, I have a routine every day. I take my car after work and I go pass by to home. The car just working fine. I go have dinner, and afterwards I take the kids and we go to the ice cream store. And whenever we got chocolate or strawberry or any other flavor, I come out, the car just works. If I get vanilla, the car doesn't work and I cannot ignite it. And that's the problem. Again, bonkers, stupid. What's going on? So he went with him to the store, and whenever they get any flavor, the car just works. Whenever they get vanilla, the car doesn't start up. It doesn't work. So the engineer took into attention, why does that not happen? I mean, what's wrong with the engine? Why? And why specifically that time duration? Why specifically vanilla? So the point is, usually in any ice cream store, the most requested ice cream that people always go for is vanilla ice cream. And usually vanilla ice cream is extremely demanded, so it's always there at the forefront of the stand in the ice cream store. So if Bailey right there wanted a vanilla, get you 2 scoops and you are on your way. But if I need to get you like maybe chocolate Swiss roll with like salted caramel and nutsy something, that would take some time, and I would need to go to the end of the store to get her fancy request, or to get her that blue raspberry something that she wants, and that would take much time. So what they discovered is that the engine doesn't cool down during that time when they get the vanilla ice cream. And accordingly, there's a flaw in the design of the engine. And because of so, the car doesn't start. What happened? Why? Investigate as much as possible. I torment my clients with those whys. Why? Why is it important? Why that specific performance? How would that be reflected on the learner? Is that something that is demanded? Is that something that is requested? Why are you doing something like that? Like for one time, one client told me, I need to deliver a leadership training to front office representatives. I'm like, why? Because they need to know about leadership. I'm like, why? Because at one point they will be leaders. I'm like, are they leaders? No. I mean, are they going to be leaders anytime soon? No. Okay, so why are you doing that? Because I want to develop them. How are you going to be developing people that work in the front office by getting them into leadership training? Okay. Well, because at one point I might be selecting a leader, then good. When you get to select a leader and you're going to be building up and developing in a specific talent, let's then do that training that you're asking for, or do that design. But now you're wasting effort and actually causing disturbance, because some people, it is pretty Socratic. You can consider it a Socratic question, because some people might, like, for instance, I offer Kelly that training in leadership. She comes out of the training. Where are my employees? I need to be leading right now. Get me people. Well, you're not. Am I getting a promotion? No. What's going to happen? No. And what will you do as well, Kelly? You will start to look at your leader, and you will start to be skeptic, and you will start to do some projections, and you name it, the kind of problems that can happen. Many office politics can come into play right now. And you can go back to, I mean, The Office, if you know what I mean, and you would understand what I mean. Okay, so yes, you need to go through those whys. Number 2, consider creating a persona. You need to understand, who are the employees? Go back to contextual analysis that we talked about. Who are they? What kind of terminologies that they are more familiar with? What kind of culture? What kind of industry? What is that industry more inclined towards? What do you usually do? A day in a life. I always like to ask that question. A day in a life. What do they usually do in a day? And usually I like to go into 4 specific facets when it comes to learner persona: self, sight, scope, and scale. Self, what's their perception of the topic or the learning? Have they went through it before? And also, what do they understand about it? What do they do not understand? Sight, what kind of behavior do they showcase in regards to that topic? How do they see themselves carrying out those specific tasks? Scope. How is that topic related to the scope of work that they do? What amount of skills and knowledge that they already have and they think that they have? And then scale. What do they do on day-to-day basis? How would you be able to scale the percentage of utilizing that specific learning into their day-to-day performance? Because I need to know if it's severe, has high severity, or it's something that they might do, it's seasonal, not much, something that is optional. I need to understand more about the persona, about who am I doing this for, especially if we're doing this for asynchronous purposes. Okay, 3, choose one high priority action and make sure it's specific. You don't need to go into a gazillion actions that the learner needs to go through. Just one high priority action is more than enough. 4, decide which approach to take with the client and the SME. Do you want to go into directive questions where you are directing towards specific answers that are specific to a knowledge context or a skill that they need to do, or you want to use open-ended questions where they would be just ranting and ranting and ranting? It's really according to how you want to tailor the questions you want to include for that meeting. 5, start with the environment context. Understand more about the environment. What do they do? What's the location? What's the field like? Do they work together? Do they work apart? That needs a directive approach. Ask about the skill and knowledge and motivation. What motivates them to learn? What demotivates them to learn? You could be creating an e-learning and they've already had bad experiences with e-learning. You could be creating a micro-learning, but it was never a micro-learning. It was actually a huge Zoom video or a webinar, and they just dissected it into segments, and there you go. It's a micro-learning campaign. So you need to know some prerequisites about what the learner has been through before and how you can either mitigate those hurdles or obstacles or build upon them, because sometimes it can be an opportunity. 7, repeat or reconsider as well for all high priority actions. Are you sure this is what we're going to work on? Are you sure this is what's going to help with the performance goal? And then 8, help the client see the solution. As a matter of fact, I consider learning designers to be tailors and scientists, people that can advocate, they can weave, and also they can also advocate. They can tell the client to see certain angles that they did not consider, to consider things or consider solutions or even consider conditions that they were not aware of. You need to do that and then summarize it, document it, and send an email for it. Because if you end up that meeting without writing anything, it can be a problem, because you'll be like, oh, I was under the impression that you would do this. No, there's an email. Minutes of meeting, a mum. Minutes of meeting, a complete mum with everything, because we don't need that kind of confusion. So let's go into the nitty-gritty of it when it comes to action mapping. So I got a training request right there. The training request, your draft and measurable business goal that you want people to get to based on a specific performance that is possible within that workplace. Accordingly, what do people need to do to reach that goal? Obviously, specific actions. I need to go and look into those specific actions and see the behaviors associated with it. For each behavior, why people aren't doing it. Is it the problem caused by issues of motivation? Maybe they're not motivated. Well, maybe motivation is low motivation is low because of the environment, because of work conditions, because they're not getting paid, maybe because they work a lot, maybe they're not compensated, or is it a lack of knowledge or a lack of skill? If yes, it's a problem of motivation, then you need to go back, because if you do remember, we don't motivate people. We don't do learning design to motivate people. We work with lack of knowledge and skills. Okay. If no, it's not a problem of motivation, good. Would maybe a simulation, scenarios work on that? Maybe we can help with a campaign that you're working with, and that can add people in terms of like knowledge and skills, and that can help them further. No, then find another way to motivate them. Maybe give them money, make them sandwiches. Training is not the answer at this point. Okay, find something else. This is not our job yet. If the problem is a problem of skill, we're going to discuss that in a bit. How do we design learning activities to address skill issues? If it's a problem of knowledge, it's not that easy. Well, knowledge. Where should the knowledge be stored? Not storied. That's a mistake on my end. Where should the knowledge be stored? If the knowledge should not be stored in the mind, then let me explain. Do you want people to have the knowledge anchored and manipulated so they would use it on the go? Or maybe I want to go back to maybe a bulletin board or a job aid that is hanged, or maybe an infographic to know the steps, to understand the process. Maybe it's more like a reminder that at that time, I don't need to create a training or a full-fledged program. Maybe I just need to do a job aid. Maybe I need to do a QR code. When they scan it, they get a video, or maybe even an interactive video that tells them about the steps. Maybe I'm going to be creating something in AR, in augmented reality, and you can create AR as easy as, don't be discouraged by the word AR, because you could do it as easy as using PowerPoint. You could use this tool. It's called Zapper. It's Zapworks. The website is Zapworks. Zapworks, you create an account, a free account. And when you go and create an account, you can create a hobbyist account for personal uses. And that can offer you around like 5 different interactions for free that can be catered to more than 50 people using the single Zapper or the single learning asset. When you go into a tool, which is web-based, that doesn't really demand you being a Mac person or a Windows person, whatever the OS that you're using, you can create something there. So people can actually scan a Zap code or a QR code and they can get the information, because you don't really need it to be stored in the mind. You don't need them to be fully retained when it comes to it, okay? So if it's something that would be actually dependent on memory and they need to be fully aware and anchored with it, again, we're going to go into designing learning activities that can help with something like that. But if not, then we should look into, well, here, is there any of the following true? The job aid maybe would be too slow. The job aid would have maybe social costs, because maybe if I put up a job aid in a very dynamic factory, they might not look into it. So you're doing a job aid and you're expecting people to leave the production line and go look at a job aid. That will be an issue. Okay, so sometimes job aids might seem nice, but according to the industry, it's not really good. The industry, I mean, you're targeting. Okay, also, maybe the worker physically cannot use a job aid. Here, we're targeting so many different things. Maybe it's a problem of accessibility. Maybe it's a problem of access, because they're far away from a place where you can actually hang a bulletin board or put an infographic, or they cannot scan, or maybe there are network issues, or maybe they're in a place where they're mining. Because I remember one time I was talking to a very lovely friend of mine, and she's actually one of the big names in the field. Her name is Emily Wood, and she's an ATD facilitator. And she was creating a specific learning experience that is not created for not laptops, not computers, not even mobile devices, but PDAs. I was like, PDAs? Do people still use that? She's like, yeah, PDAs are still used by people that are working in telecommunication, and in mining because it doesn't need the same frequency nor connection that mobile devices need. And also, we do not need it to have high tech included in it. We need something simple and can be there with the people that will be exposed to that learning. They could be engineers, they could be technicians, and so on and so forth. So you need to understand that, because you could spend an entire time building a rise and it would not work, or an entire time doing it genially, or a storyline and it doesn't fit. So yes, put that into consideration. Now, if it's yes for all of those, and I would need to put into consideration that job aid will be too slow, it will cause social cost, then again, I'm going to go and help them memorize it. No, it's not going to be a problem. Then I need to ask another question. Does this task happen often? I mean, does it happen on daily basis? Seasonal? Occasional? How many times does it occur? Because if it's a yes, does the task need the job aid to be, due? Should it be always there? Because imagine, I'm putting a job aid that is extremely important, Kelly, okay? And they use it on day-to-day basis, and it's right there on the wall. So do you think that every time they need to carry out an action, they will go back to the checklist, they will go back to the job aid? Obviously, that doesn't work. Again, looks like I need to make them memorize it. But if it's something that happens occasionally, something that is not that severe, something that they need to be aware of, but it's not going to be that demanding or pressing, well, job aid is okay. Okay, so if there will be serious consequences, if there will be frequent changes, if there will be any means of complexity, then obviously, again, I'm going to be depending on memory, then I'm going to be designing learning activities. But if it's not, then a job aid would work because they can simply go and look it up. Now, this is when job aids and infographics can work, but there's still a caveat. If I created the job aid or an infographic for my client, for my learners, and I created the learning assets, I need to ask another question. Should people be taught on how to use the job aid? Do they need onboarding? Maybe it's a tech issue. Maybe they're not aware of the technology. Maybe they're not aware of the process. Maybe they need like a complete video onboarding or like an awareness campaign. Maybe you're doing this learning to aid a change or a merger or an acquisition that is happening. I was there when Barclays is no longer in my country anymore. Yeah, Michael, we don't have Barclays anymore. Barclays left the country. That was back in 2017. And a Moroccan bank actually bought all of the Barclays in the Middle East. It's another bank called the Tujari Luafi. Very hard to pronounce at this point, I know. But yeah, no more Barclays. So I was with the employees that went through something like that. And it was very severe, very complex, and they needed to be onboarded on the entire thing. And we were part of the team that helped with the onboarding to teach them about how to do something like that, to advocate how to go through the steps of change when it comes to organizational acquisition. Okay, so should people be taught on how to use? Well, obviously, if yes, then we need to go back into designing learning activities. If no, then just distribute the learning asset, no problem. So we talk now about the issue of motivation, issue of skill, issue of knowledge, last but not least, the issue of environment. I need to ask, is this problem cultural? No, it's not a cultural problem. Cool, because cultural problems we can't really do much about. Can the client solve that problem? Compensate them, give them benefits, do something to help. If no, then obviously training might help employees work around the problem, but this is not really the ideal solution. And I need to let my client know about this, okay? It's not a cultural issue, okay? You cannot really help with it, but that doesn't mean that training would help as well. Yes, the client can solve it. Good for you, client. Go solve the environmental problem, because training is not the answer. Well, is the problem a cultural problem? Yes, it is a cultural problem. Good. Could training help change the culture? Are we going to be included in a learning experience that would aid cultural change? Maybe this is where our responsibility would come to play. Probably not. We won't be part of that, and we will not take part in this. Then solve the cultural problem some other way, and afterwards, go and draft another measurable business goal. This is action pick. But we need now to go there, to designing learning activities, to finish the map. Now, we've talked that we only work with lack of knowledge, lack of skill, and based on the lack of knowledge and the lack of skill, we will be able to understand that there's a specific action that we should be focusing on. So at the center, we have that action, and that action has to be targeted using specific activities. For instance, they're going to go through that case study, they're going to do that branching scenario, they will be able to go through that knowledge simulation of some sort. Maybe they would need to go and do like an awareness campaign using a video. Come with me. The collection of those activities would help facilitate that action to come to life. Then I would need to do the following. Well, I need to look into, what do I need to let people do? Sometimes a specific activity can be done using maybe 2 learning methods, or maybe 1 learning method. It could be done through a debate, a brainstorm, a lecture, a buzz group, a peer review, a game, a question and answer, a case study. Come on, mate. And then I need to understand what minimum necessary knowledge is needed for them to carry out those learning methods, to be able to do the activity and get to the action. Nevertheless, sometimes an action can be facilitated by 1 activity, 1 way, and they need 2 pieces of knowledge that are minimum and necessary for them to be able to do something. Or 2 actions are actually dependent on a single thing, a single learning method. If they did this, they will be able to carry out the rest. And that can be 1 piece of knowledge or 2 pieces of knowledge. And sometimes it's pretty much linear. In order for them to get to the action and do the activity, they need to do a specific exercise or a specific learning method and know a specific thing. This is when we are mapping things out. But when we are designing things in, and when we're doing our topic analysis and our topic research, we understand the minimum necessary knowledge, find the methods and instructions and assessment that can facilitate it, form an activity that can make it work, and that can help get us to the action we want. Again, maybe 2 pieces of knowledge that are needed can be done by 1 single activity, 1 single learning method, and that can take us to the action, and so on and so forth. So we map out, and then we design in. We map out the entire thing, and when we design in. So when we're doing our storyboarding, when we're doing our drafting, when we're doing our learning kits, we know specifically what we will include, and we're not going to go out of the borders that we've created for that map. And that, again, depends on A, identify the business goals. B, identify the actions needed. C, design activities to practice the action. And find the minimum necessary knowledge for this to come to life. I'm going to pause. And anyone has any questions about the things that I've been mentioning here? Questions? You're awfully silent for a change. So what's going on? Usually you talk.
You want us to ask why?
Oh, yeah. Why? Yeah. So I was taking notes. Fair enough. Okay, respected that. Anyone has any actions? Because I'm gonna get into learning objectives. Is there an infographic of everything that you had up on screen? Well, I'm gonna send you the presentation. And have the video. So you can open up the presentation, take a screenshot so you have the entire thing. And by the way, I did not create that. This was actually in the book by Kathy Moore. I just facilitated it, that's all. Okay. Now, one of the huge issues that I have with people in the learning industry is learning objectives. Because many people misrepresent them. I call learning objectives the blueprint. If you do not construct correct intended learning objectives, you are obviously going to fail in your design and dev work. This is like the core, the cement that holds everything together. So learning objective really depends on many different frameworks and approaches. But the most famous framework that people go through is Bloom's taxonomy. Anyone knows about Bloom's taxonomy? Finally, I got answers. Okay, cool. Sweet. Okay, what do you know about Bloom's taxonomy? This is your time to shine. Tell me something. Help me. Throw me a bone here.
It's about like the stages of learning. So the first stage is quite broad, and then it kind of narrows down into more specific things as you kind of work your way through.
Okay, that's the pyramid.
Yeah.
That's not a taxonomy. See, that's that trap that I left for you. That's usually, dude, that's Michael, that's the thing. People always consider it as a pyramid, and it's not a pyramid.
I think I've seen it as a pyramid. I've seen it.
Oh, by the way, it's circulated all over the internet. It was just write down Bloom's taxonomy. It's always a pyramid. For some unknown reason, this has been circulated. Thank you so much, JS. High order thinking levels. Thank you. We're gonna get to that. Okay, so Bloom's taxonomy. Well, it's been created, obviously, Michael, by Dr. Benjamin Bloom in the 1950s, 1956 to be specifically accurate. And as many of the frameworks that were created for learning, it was created for the military, and it was created for many other reasons that are very regulatory based, very firm in their sequence and process. But the framework has actually been iterated in 2001, where the pinnacle of it is not evaluation, is actually creation. And also the other iteration that the students of Benjamin Bloom worked on is that we're not only working on cognition, but also we're working on psychomotor and affective. So we're working on the cognitive domain, working on the psychomotor domain, and we're working on the affective domain. But the most famous domain that many people do talk about, that many people do discuss, is the cognitive domain. For the sake of our session, I'm not going to go into like the depth and wealth of everything that is taxonomy, but a taxonomy is you can visualize it, you can consider it as if it's a gearbox, sets of gears that are intertwined and they work together, cognitive, psychomotor, and affective, all of them working together, not only cognition. And also, true, it's a taxonomy, and taxonomy takes us from one level to the other, but that doesn't mean, and this is something that happened to me in different classes where I was teaching learning design, is that people think that I can take my learner from the least level of cognition all the way to the highest level of cognition, and that's a must. Actually, that's wrong. And I do not need to start from the bottom to go to the top, and I don't need to go to the top. So let me explain. Bloom's taxonomy is just one way of writing down learning objectives, and it's in the body of knowledge that is in the academy, and I do use it and I do teach it, and I've been using it for years, but you need to use it with finesse. So it starts off with remember, which is the least level of cognition. That I remembered something. Good for you. That you remembered what it is. You depended on memory. Memory is not cognition. When you start to go into higher means of cognition, this is when we use understand. Understanding something, that means that Anthony can explain it. Kara can discuss it. Sarah could be able to describe it. Kelly would be able to recognize it. All of those are verbs that express that specific cognitive level, okay? And then apply, which is a higher cognitive level than understanding, because it dictates manipulation. Okay. There's a power. The power got cut off. Give me a moment. Give me a moment. Give me a moment. Give me a moment. Power got cut off. I need to change. I need to use a different camera. That's for starters.
I was just thinking, Mo, it's not a pyramid, it's a horizontal.
Am did I get struck by the wrath of God or something? But what's going on? Okay. What other cameras? Oh, there's one. Okay, but it's pretty dark. Which one's this? Oh, this one. Okay, cool. Hey! Oh, Tom. Okay, I need to use a different camera.
Wow, that was a super fast recovery. I'm impressed.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I need to work on that one. Situated in a way that I will be visible. Okay. Good. Cool. Okay. So give me a moment. Which camera am I using? And then Prezi. Hey, we're back. Okay. So as I said, apply is a higher level of cognition because it needs, and the power's back. Because it needs more means of manipulation, where the learner did not only understand something, but they can understand it, use it, and follow a process, follow specific steps, do something about it. That's why we call remember, understand, and apply the LOTS, low order thinking. LOT, the LOTS, low order of thinking, okay? And why do we call them that? Because it doesn't really need that much cognitive load for the learner to remember something, to understand something, or to apply. When I'm saying apply, that doesn't mean that they're making something out of new. When I say apply, is that they're following a process. You go, Sarah, and you tell people follow a framework. Kara, you tell people about like complaint handling, and complaint handling can be done by using the laugh process. Listen, apologize, fix, and follow up, for instance. Okay, so you would do a role play where they would be practicing this. They're not doing anything other than following the process that you've mentioned for them, which means they're applying. They're not doing anything more than that. Borderline imitation, okay? And I believe we've talked about imitation and performing something at the beginning of our mentorship sessions, that there's a huge difference when it comes to performing, precision, and excellence. Skills have levels. A skill has a level. You can be performing something, which means that you can do it, but it can have mistakes, it can have flaws. But if you're doing it with precision, that means that you're doing it every time correctly. If I'm saying someone has excellence in something, that means they're doing it every time correctly, and they're adding a touch to it, or they're adding more characterization to it, which is a huge difference between the different levels of skills that can be applied in the learning experience. Okay, now to continue on without digressing, Then you have analysis. Now, analysis means that they don't only know how to apply it, but they also know how to arrange it. They know how to prioritize it. They know how to put it into snips, into sequences. They can do divisions of it. They can put subcomponents of it. This is a higher level of application because that means they know how to practice, they know how to perform, and they know how to dissect. Huge difference between it. Okay, give me a moment again. I'm going to return back to my other camera for better viewing. And open this up. We're back. Much better. Thank you. Okay. Then we have evaluation. Evaluation is being able to call on a judgment, is being able to say, this is good, this is bad. And obviously, no one will be able to say this is good, this is bad without being able to know the components. They wouldn't be able to know how to apply it. And they wouldn't know how to evaluate if they wouldn't be able to carry out the process or carry out the template or carry out the steps themselves to be able to say this is good, then this is bad. So it's not only that they can divide it, but they can even manage to put on a judgment of whether this works and this doesn't. The last level and the last part, which is the pinnacle in the cognition domain, that is creation, being able to create something out of new, meaning I give someone a process, a plan, a way, and then I tell them, apply this into your day-to-day activities. Like, again, I'm going to go back to the CIPD that I just mentioned before. In order for me to get my diploma, I need to use all of the knowledge, all of the data that I've learned, and then use it in my work activities and create complete essays and theses about how I can use that based on what I do in day-to-day formats. Yes, and that's why CIPD takes months for me to finish, not just a learning experience that happens in a day or two. And we have people that do like quality checks and they go through if each and every part of the process is correct. It's pretty rigorous. So to make it even more clear, now in level 1, can the learner recall or remember the information? That's why we use the action verbs of define, duplicate, list, memorize, recall, repeat, state. Can the learner explain the ideas? So for instance, if you said by the end of this training program, by the end of this learning experience, the learner will be able to classify. That means in the e-learning, there has to be a specific instruction, a specific means of assessment that can indicate that the learner managed to classify. Or if you're going to be doing this for a physical classroom and say by the end of this learning program, Kristen will be able to explain. That means that there will be a specific learning application, a specific instructional method that would let Kristen explain. And I, as a trainer, will be able to see if this is physical, or I, as a developer doing e-learning, can have a mechanism that can make me sure that the explanation worked. That could be through a problem-based question, like I've mentioned before, or maybe through a branching scenario, or maybe through a game, or maybe through a case study where they have to write down specific answers and so on and so forth. Okay. And also we use application. Can the learner use information in a new way? Can they follow a process? Can they choose? Can they demonstrate? Can they dramatize? Can they employ? Can they interpret? Can they operate? Can they perform? Can they sketch? All of this is in the lot. Now, when we go into the hot, which is high order thinking, we use verbs that are more severe, meaning can the learner distinguish between different parts? This is where we use verbs like, by the end of this learning experience, they will be able to criticize, distinguish, examine, experiment, question, test. This is when I can actually let them not only go through a case study, but sometimes a simulation where I can give them a process or a template or something that has faults and has issues in it, and they need to arrange it. And this can take me even to more severe aspects of calling judgment, which is evaluation, where you can use the verbs of they will be able to argue, defend, select, support, and obviously evaluate. Last but not least, creation. Can the learner create a new product or a point of view? They can assemble, construct, create, and design. But okay, levels, like how Michael managed to explain it really good. But the point is, Michael, maybe I'm doing this learning experience to senior staff members. Do I need to start from the lot? That would be absurd. As I said, minimum necessary knowledge. So obviously, I could be starting with them from the apply and then end up in the analysis, because the learning objective that would help a specific job behavior to come to life, that would help a performance to come to life, doesn't need no more than that. I don't need to get people from down to up, because as I said, I was in a program, and I had learning designers and veteran trainers, and they were all before me, and I'm explaining that to them, and the guy got offended. I'm like, how can you try to convince me that I cannot let my learners come out of my program creating? I'm like, what's the use? Will it help? That's actually a meme. Will it help? Would it help in any way possible? No. That's like bombarding people, because maybe the performance that is demanded only needs people to analyze or sometimes to apply. It's not bad for you to create a learning program that really ends up with application. But if you have a learning program and only ends up with understanding, that's more of an awareness session, because there's no application in it. So we're staring away from being a learning application that is applicable, but rather something that is more of a job aid or a note or a reminder. And we don't do that. We create something that can change people's behavior, and changing people's behavior needs to be observed. And the behavior has to be asserted and shown. And you can offer feedback about it. And you can let people know that they failed or they did good. They need to be incentivized. They need to have instant means of gratification in your learning experience, whether it was synchronous or asynchronous, so they can continue on forward. So obviously, if they're only understanding and you're building up just on understanding, that's not really the best kind of application possible. What about affective? Well, the affective domain, that's something else, because the affective domain, it's a complete different thing, because when you're going into the affective domain, you need to put it in tandem with also the cognitive and the psychomotor domain. Let's talk about that after, like, when we're done, we can talk about that. I promise we can talk about that if you want. So the point is, when you're writing down learning objectives based on everything that we've mentioned, do put into consideration that there are 3 specific verbs that are considered blasphemy and absolute absurdity. And just like how Zeus was upset with me and like shut off the power from my office, this can happen to you as well. So you will be subjected to the wrath of the gods if you use those 3 specific words when you're writing down your learning objectives. A, by the end of this learning experience, you will be able to know. No is not an actionable verb. No doesn't have any substance. No doesn't show any means of measurement. By the end of this learning, you'll be able to know. No. So when I'm developing, when I'm designing, when I'm creating, what does no mean? You mean they will be able to define, identify, explain? Because each and every one of those verbs dictate a completely different learning method. So never use the word no. By the end of this learning program, you'll be able to understand. Yes, I know. That's the name of the level, not the verb that you were right. Because again, Kelly understood, Kara understood, Anthony understood. What's the measurement? Where's the meter? How can I know? because knowing needs to be identified. Even when we're doing our storyboarding, which is something that we're going to be discussing later on, every storyboard has to start with, by the end of this experience, by the end of this asset, the learner will be able to, what's the enabling objective behind that learning asset that you're creating, an e-learning, asynchronous e-learning asset, because this is something that you'll be sending to your clients, because you would tell them that in your scored package that you will be creating, people will not pass from that stage to the other unless they satisfy that specific notion with that specific percentage of success. You want them to pass with 50% success, 70% success, based on what? No? Understand? That's not really measurable by all means. And also, by the end of this learning program, you'll be able to learn. Learn can be anything. Learn can be from the base of the remember all the way to the top. So K-U-L, kol. Come on, man, how you want to pronounce it. Never use them, ever. And someone will be like, but I've seen people online write it. I've seen programs do that because they're ridiculous. There's a proverb in Arabic that says that if something is commonly wrong, that doesn't mean it's right. Okay? Yeah, it's in Arabic, or what is commonly wrong doesn't mean it's right. It means that the wrong has been spread out, but that doesn't mean that it's correct. So this is something that we always tell people: put things that can support you as a designer, because when you write down no, and then later on you get into putting up the methods and starting off your storyboarding, you will be confused because you wouldn't really know what to do. You wouldn't really be able to put this to life, to give it some life. You can't really Frankenstein it. You need to identify the specific actionable verb, because that would really help you later on know exactly what you would do in the learning experience. And can it be a possible draft? And then later on, when we get to dissecting it down, it would change? Yeah, it would. But you need to start off with something that is actionable, not something that is vague and ambiguous. Okay? Now, this is Bloom's taxonomy. The last thing I'm going to be mentioning is objectives should satisfy 4 main things, or consider them 4 main tenets. Number 1, the audience. Who is this aimed at? Number 2, the behavior. What do you expect them to be able to do? This should be an overt, observable, specific behavior. Even if the actual behavior is covert or mental in nature, if you can't see it, hear it, touch it, and taste it, or smell it, the learner can as well. Your audience wouldn't be able to. Last but not least, condition and degree. Condition. Under what circumstances will the learning occur? What will the student or the learner be given or already be expected to know to accomplish the learning? Will they be onboarded? Do they have specific prerequisites? Do they need to be provided with the prerequisite? Will they be doing this under specific conditions, specific environmental conditions? They will be using this in different languages. Sometimes you can create, if anyone here knows a different language, if like bilingual, for instance, you could be having an e-learning program that can go into 2 different languages, like literally a complete narrative in like Spanish and another narrative in English. You can't really do translation in that sense. You need to cater it according to the culture. So those who only speak Spanish can relate to it, and those who only speak English, because I've created one for a company that had Indians and Germans and Egyptians. So I needed to do something that has branches that can speak to 3 different cultures, so we can increase how relevant it is to the learner. Hopefully no one will go through that experience. It was tormenting. Last but not least, the degree. How will the objective be measured? You must have a specific set of criteria, in that you have a specific criteria to be met. That specific criteria can be by doing this, by seeing them being able to do that, by them fulfilling a specific thing, by them carrying out a specific behavior in class, or do something in a learning experience, or get to a specific answer, or maybe carry out a specific action in a learning experience, come what may. So you need to know how far the degree is. Do you want them to be able to only recall it, define it, explain it, justify it, just apply it, or follow through a process? This has to be considered, because later on, I'm telling you, when you're going to be storyboarding this or creating a learning kit for a physical experience, this can be your aid. This can help you out without you getting into analysis paralysis later on. Okay, so yeah, this is it for the usual understanding, the overall understanding of action mapping and learning objectives. Obviously, many different dividends can come out of this. Like, we're going to do that for blended learning, we're going to do that for micro learning, we're going to do that for a campaign, and so on and so forth. Whatever the kind of experience that you'll be creating later on, it has to have concrete actions, actionable verbs that can be assertively measured, addressed, and be given feedback upon. Okay, this can be your aid. And by the way, speaking of which, today I was in a webinar speaking about creating exciting learning content. I did not choose that name. I don't use the word exciting, but they chose it. Okay, and I'll try to get you the recording of it, but what I want to offer you is this specific e-learning. It's not an e-learning, it's more of like a takeaway message / book that people can have after a session, and go to a part in that asset that is called progression system. In progression system, you will see the different types of feedback that you can use, and also what makes a good model for explaining a topic or a specific piece of content. I call it the Trinity, that the Trinity of design. It has to have design, influence, and flow. And my specific focus is on flow. Hopefully that can help you out when you're creating and designing experiences coming on forward. Okay, I'm going to close the recording because obviously we broke the hour as usual, but I mean, we broke it only by like 15 minutes. Get into question and answer and see whatever the inquiry that you might have. Okay, let's do that.